Your hosts are here, Sammie and Michelle. By the end of this podcast, you'll know them well. Adulting, navigating the journey of life. Careers to relationships, pain and strife. Put down the rule book, rethink the status quo. If there's another direction you wanna go, find purpose, passion and mastery in all that you do with Status Post Adulting.
Hey, Status Post Adulting fam! This is Sammie
and Michelle.
And you're listening to the 80th episode of Status Post Adulting, where we are talking about our top life-changing podcasts.
Yes, we are, Sammie. And I'm really excited about this because I saw this topic, I'm not going to lie, I think on the YouTuber Ali's channel. And I thought it would be great for us because we listen to a lot of podcasts. And it was a fun exercise to go through and really think about the ones that changed my perspective in a really big way, that encouraged me to go and buy a book after or take some sort of action after. On top of all of that, I would say that now that we have a podcast and we've been producing a podcast, I also have a different perspective and a greater appreciation for the high quality podcasts that are out there.
Absolutely, Michelle. I have been a huge fan of podcasts for so long. Maybe 10 years? No, maybe less than that. But for so long, and podcasts have really changed my life. And when I think about life-changing podcasts, it's like, yes, this is such a great topic because I would love to share the podcast that I find the most meaningful and just the most transformative, because I really do think that podcasts have changed my life drastically. And so I think this is a great episode topic choice.
Well said, Sammie. And to start out, we have a super original, very unique podcast that was on both of our lists.
It's pretty much the greatest podcast of all time. It's just, we love this podcast and so does everybody else. It's The Tim Ferriss Show with Tim Ferriss.
Yeah, a little indie podcast called The Tim Ferriss Show.
A little niche, hard to find podcast. Michelle, so I am obsessed with Tim Ferriss. I first read his book, The 4-Hour Workweek, right when I started my regular 40-hour work week. And let me tell you, I was disappointed to find out that I had done everything wrong. I really did read that book and thought, oh my gosh, I did everything wrong. But the podcast is also great. It's not about the same topic of a 4-hour work week. It's Tim interviewing different people and just listening to it, listening to his questions, listening to these insights of all these great people is just so inspiring.
I have to agree, Sammie. I was looking back at the different podcasts that I listened to. Tim Ferriss definitely stretches back probably the furthest for me. I think he's probably one of the first podcasts I actually listened to. But when I look at how many different people I was able to discover through Tim Ferriss, Derek Sivers, David Rubenstein, Bozoma St. John, she really influenced me because she was a woman in tech. And I just went deep diving into all of these people, their own work, their blogs, their books. I love Tristan Harris of Your Undivided Attention podcast, which I discovered through the Tim Ferriss Show. And that really was huge for me because I became obsessed with how social media is evil after that. And it really changed my life in terms of getting rid of my social media and all of that. So,
yes, Tim Ferriss introducing us to Tristan Harris probably is the reason we are not on social media. So that's a huge one. I agree with that, Michelle, too.
And they're 2 hours now, which is a little bit insane. But he does now do recap episodes. And I'm going to be honest, I'm not upset that they're 2 hours because I'm I can't listen to this for 2 hours. It's because I'll always pick it up and I'll be I'll see if I enjoy this one. And then I'll end up listening to the full 2 hours, which is a book, honestly, a short book.
Yeah, that's so true. The number of hours that I've listened to Tim Ferriss podcasts is probably a little bit ridiculous, but I find it so inspiring. Like I always find something insightful. I listen to Peter Attia now because of Tim Ferriss. There's just a lot of podcasts that I've been introduced to through Tim Ferriss's work. Esther Perel I found through Tim Ferriss. Yeah. Just like so many insightful people. Mr. Money Mustache was on there. Like it's literally everything. And yes, he has tons of ads, but you know why? It's because he has a great podcast and people want to listen to it. And you know, Michelle, I feel really bonded with Tim too. Like, I feel like I listen to him. Like, I listened to 4 Hour Work Week. I listened to his beginning podcast. And I really feel like I've seen him grow and let go of his ego, you know, and just really develop as a person. And I think that journey is just also so fun because you really see how he is now self-exploring and just really becoming a deeper and more spiritual person. And I think it's a journey that we all go on, and you can really see him in real time go and develop that way.
Yeah, Sammie, it's funny because we definitely have one of those parasocial relationships with Tim Ferriss, probably more than anybody else on this list today. We'll talk about him and his growth, we know him, which we don't.
We'll be oh. We know his laugh. We talk about him like he's our friend, literally, and we don't know him.
Yeah, Sammie and I always talk about doing parody videos of Tim Ferriss because we to parody him because we've listened to so much of his stuff, and we're that would just be such really specific content. But yeah, so we're big fans. Obviously, it is one of the biggest podcasts out there, so it's not a huge surprise, but I think of all the big ones out there, it's definitely one of the ones that's really worth your time. If you're interested in things like self-development, if you're looking for new authors to follow, if you like doing psychedelics, which I'm not going to lie, I kind of skip all those episodes, but hey, if you're into it, that he's big into that too.
Yes, Michelle, he's definitely into that. And other niche people, we got Oprah.
We did start this funnel, Sammie, with the most popular. They do become, I think, a little bit more unique as we go on, but we could not leave off Oprah's Super Soul podcast.
Yes. I've been a huge fan of Oprah, but her Super Soul Sunday podcast is it's another one of those podcasts where you go into it and you listen to it and you really feel inspired afterwards. And Oprah, you know, especially being a podcaster now, she is so skilled at being vulnerable, being so authentic in her reactions, but then also asking great questions, but also moving the conversation along. She really gets to the deep parts of people's story quickly, and she just dives in, and it's really inspirational to listen to.
I totally agree, Sammie. She is obviously a powerhouse. She is amazing. And when her podcast came out, originally I was a bit oh, it's going to be kind of cliche and whatever. I don't know. I was just a little bit closed-minded, and I'm such a sucker for it. I love Oprah Super Soul. We quote it all the time. Sammie and I will often quote each other. We'll say things like guilt is an emotion of the ego, which is from her episode with Jana Van Zandt. I remember, I think I really got into Elizabeth Gilbert after her podcast. Her interview with both Oprah and Tim Ferriss really opened my eyes to her perspective, and I read a lot more of her material after that. You were always into Eckhart Tolle, but I really discovered him through Oprah, and he really helped me actually during the pandemic a lot in terms of just thinking about the world and what we were going through.
Yeah, Michelle, Oprah and Eckhart, I think, are just the cutest little friendship pair. You know, what I love about Oprah is she is totally of the earth and of the material realm, but then has this aspect to her that's very spiritual and tries to kind of rationalize both of those worlds. And so when she asks questions, she asks the questions that your material self is inquiring about. And then, but she brings on these spiritual people that really, really speak to your higher mind. So it's a real blend of I'm a regular person who has to go to a regular job, but I'm also trying to understand these higher concepts and really grow myself and progress along my soul path.
Definitely, Sammie. I think if you're interested in things like spirituality, in just a general sense, Oprah's a great person for that too. She makes it really accessible and she just gets it. Like, she is a human being who is working through the same things that we are. And I totally agree with what you said.
Exactly, Michelle. Even the way she says things, like, she's like, this is going into the woo-woo territory. And like the way she says it, you know that she knows that how it's going to come off is so extra and like not going to resonate with everybody. But at the same time, she does feel it. And I think that's like this battle that we all feel like, you know, we have these higher selves and we're in tune with them and trying to learn about them. And at the same time, like, we understand that that may seem a little eccentric to some people. And that's how Oprah is. She just like acknowledges both of those planes, but like walks both those lines.
Speaking of woo-woo, the next podcast on both of our lists was the Know Your Aura podcast with Mystic Michaela, which if you're our friend, if you've listened to this podcast before, you know we recommended her episodes before. And I just want to say, we know. We totally get it.
We get it. Mm-hmm.
We get what you're thinking, okay?
Yeah. We're obsessed with this lady who sees colors around people, and you're like, not sure if I believe that. Totally get it.
Totally get it. But I remember hearing Mystic Michaela first, I think, on the Girls Gotta Eat podcast. And I was really interested in how she organized people by their quote-unquote aura color, which Sammie and I have taken so many personality quizzes. We are obsessed. Obviously, you know, if you listen to this podcast, there's so many different ones that we dive into. I don't think there is one that we will categorize people more by than by their aura color.
Yes.
Like, Sammie and I will always be like, oh, yeah, like, it makes sense because she's kind of red or she's kind of yellow or whatever it is. And it just creates this common language. And we just really have started to understand, like, without seeing auras, what these categorizations mean.
Yes, it's so true. The aura colors really provide a framework of how to categorize and understand people, even if you don't believe in auras. And I feel the same way about her podcast. Like, she talks about these spiritual topics, and during the episode, there'll be a part where, like, she talks alone about a topic. And you can tell she's channeling when she speaks because it just really resonates, and it's coming from a place where you feel like she's talking to you, but at the same time, like, it's like one of those moments where, like, somebody says something and, like, immediately you get an insight and you understand things more deeply. She does that all the time about, like, all different topics. Like, she'll do it about empaths and, you know, understanding that. She'll do it about, like, each aura colors, kind of like their vice, or, like, you know, how they are perceived, or just, like, all these different topics. And it just really resonates, I feel like, when she talks about it. Like, I really... Same thing, like, just always have insights when listening to her podcast.
Yeah, Sammie, even outside of aura colors, I agree with you, like, exactly what you said. Like, I've taken notes from her episodes on empaths. Like, that really helped me. Empath manifestation, understanding how empaths and narcissists work. Like, a lot of that was really eye-opening for me and really changed the way I approached people.
It's so true.
Also, her things about people-pleasing, just different...
The narcissist,
light psychology topics that she delves into. It's just really interesting to hear her perspective from, again, like, a spiritual side.
Yes. I really liked her episode on burnout from a spiritual perspective, because we always talk about burnout in healthcare, and we talk about, oh, burnout, you know, like, maybe you need to, like, balance work and life, and, like, you know, there's all these, like, little solutions, and Mystic Michaela just, like, kind of comes in there and is like, no. Like, you're burned out because you're not in alignment with your soul path. Sometimes you just need to hear that kind of, like, bomb drops that she can do because she's kind of speaking from, like, a higher realm place versus, like, you know, it's not advice that you could just give to everybody all the time.
Agreed, Sammie. And if you are interested in the woo-woo, or maybe you want the spirituality without the woo-woo, another big podcast that has really influenced my life was On Purpose with Jay Shetty. Jay Shetty, who wrote Think Like a Monk. He really got famous making little videos on, like, Instagram, on YouTube. I find that even though I don't listen to all of his episodes, when I look back at my notes and I see which podcast I'm pulling notes from, it's always his episodes that I listen to. They're also a little bit longer sometimes. And I just love his interviews. I talked in the last couple episodes how I loved his interviews with Big Sean. I loved his interview with Martha Beck, and I actually read The Way of Integrity because of it. I really enjoyed his interview with Gary Vee, of all people. So I highly recommend it. I honestly wasn't a fan of Jay Shetty's until I read Think Like a Monk, which we really only read because when our family was driving from Austin to San Francisco, it was the only book I had downloaded on my phone. So we just decided to listen to it all together. And it really changed my perspective on him. It changed my perspective on the way he approaches his work. I have a lot of respect for him. And yeah, I think he just really has such a great perspective on life.
I completely agree, Michelle. That was a really good book too. Think Like a Monk. Like, I agree with you. I was on the same page with Jay Shetty. I think sometimes as Indians, we can be a little harsh to other Indians, maybe.
It's true.
But
it's bad, but it's true.
Right? Yeah, like you think you know them for some reason, even though you know nothing about them. But reading the book was really insightful, and just like learning about his journey, it really gave me a new respect for him.
Yeah, you make a really good point, Sammie. So I would definitely say, if you have any preconceived notions about Jay Shetty, I would give his podcast a chance or his book a chance. I think he has a really interesting perspective.
Speaking of interesting perspectives and life-changing podcasts, one of my most favorite podcasts ever is Choose FI, aka Choose Financial Independence. As you know, we here on Status Post Adulting are huge fans of financial independence. We have tons of episodes on it. And I listen to a lot of financial independence podcasts, but I do love Choose FI. And I would say they're probably one of the largest podcasts in the space of financial independence. And I think it's for a reason. The hosts, Brad and Jonathan, they have a really good connection, an authentic connection. And they talk about financial independence from the perspective of how you want to live your life. Not so much the technical aspects. They go into the technical aspects for sure on multiple episodes, but their podcast is really about making space for living an intentional life. And part of that is just giving yourself enough money so that you don't have to worry about a job or something getting in the way of like living the life that you want to live. And I really like Choose FI because, when I first started listening to the podcast, Jonathan was working and then he eventually quit his job as a pharmacist to be partially financially independent. He wasn't financially independent completely, but also work on the podcast. And that was really inspiring to me because it really made me appreciate that, like, one, he didn't have to be completely financially independent to do what he loved. And two, like, he's somebody who went to school to be a pharmacist and did all the things and invested a lot of time and money into that career and still was like brave enough to make a pivot and do what he really loves. And now I can see like there is such a change in him. Like each year, I feel like he just becomes this person that you can tell is living an increasingly intentional life and who's also just like really more in tune with themselves and just a more joyful and more peaceful human being.
Yeah, I would agree, Sammie. I have really always enjoyed the episodes that you have flagged for me with Choose FI, and we have really been inspired by them as, I think, one of the only podcasts on our list that started off as a podcast. So that's what brought them their fame. That's what really brought them success versus coming to the podcast space with influence. And so we're obviously trying to do something similar. And so using them as a North Star has been really helpful.
Yeah, Michelle, it is actually really impressive what they've built, considering that like neither of them were influencers. Like they didn't have a following. They're just two people who started a podcast about a really interesting topic and were really authentic about it. And it really resonated with people.
Speaking of which, Sammie, the next podcast on our list is probably the most surprising, I would say, to ourselves. And also, it's obviously an actual more indie podcast at this point in time.
Currently. Maybe not in the future.
Currently. Or we don't even know. We don't know their numbers.
It's probably huge.
But Sammie and I have been listening to Alchemize Life by Justin, who we met because he was running the financial independence group in the Bay Area. So we would go to the meetings. We had the opportunity to see cool speakers while he organized all that. And he's had a nice Instagram presence, so we followed that. And we started listening to his podcast thinking, hey, we definitely want to support like a friend in this space. And I think we've both been a bit surprised by how much we've really, really enjoyed it.
Yeah, Michelle. Justin David Carl, we met him through this Stanford Choosify meetup. So
The Dragon.
The Dragon. Another thing I forgot to mention about Choosify is they have a huge community. Like they have a giant Facebook group, and then they have groups for like each region. And then each region generally has like their own meetups and stuff. So we've met tons of cool people through Choosify and their community. One of them being Justin David Carl. And he has this podcast, Alchemized Life, which, you know, we started listening to because we're like, oh, this is someone we know. Let's listen to it. And honestly, like, I think there's maybe like 6 or so episodes out right now. I have found every single one to be life-changing. It is just a podcast that is so intentional. And Justin is really unique in that he is a person who he's into financial independence, but he's also into living intentionally, also into spirituality. He's also super into being vegan and being a vegan bodybuilder, which, to be honest, like Michelle and I, look at us, we can't relate. We were eating McDonald's today. But
we're meat-eating non-bodybuilders. Unfortunately. Give us a few more episodes. We might convert.
Literally, like, yeah, next thing you know. But his podcast, like, it really hits on such awesome topics. Like, one, for example, is Sparketypes.
Yeah, I started listening to the Sparked podcast because of it. Literally listened to all those episodes. We bought the Sparked books. We have a pending podcast for Sparketypes coming at the end of the month. So stay tuned.
Yes.
And then I bought another book based off of the Sparked podcast. So it really was like a chain of events for me.
Like these podcasts that are rabbit holes, like that's what we mean by life-changing. Like they're insightful and they also lead you down rabbit holes. He had this podcast this week with this guy, Ferdinand Beck. And you can just tell when you listen to this podcast that this man is in complete flow and presence. And it's just awesome to hear him and Justin have a conversation. And like while I'm listening to them, I felt like I was just like having these higher realizations. You know, sometimes when it's like you're so inspired and you almost don't even know what's like being told to you, but it's just like so inspiring
you feel it in your soul.
Yes, it's like it resonates deeply. Like it happens with writing sometimes too, where you're like writing, you're like, I don't even know what I'm writing, but like magic is happening here. That's how it felt listening to that podcast. He just like, these podcasts are so good and they're so insightful and they're just so deep, and you can tell he really brings that passion of like wanting to just help other people when he makes these episodes. And I think that's what really makes it so that you can really feel that awesome inspiration, that awesome life-changingness of his episodes.
Totally agree, Sammie. I will have to stop listening though, because I keep buying things based off of his podcast. And I think I'm going to go broke.
Like the books?
The books, the classes. I saw Cody from the Fi Show was on there. That's when I signed up for that one course. So yeah, I'm going to go broke if I keep listening to Justin's podcast.
I was like, vegan protein powders? Flavor, like, flavor watermelon?
I have been spending a ton of money on vegan protein powders. No, unfortunately, I hate vegan protein powders. Very specific dislike, but...
Yeah, we almost can't eat them because of how little fiber is probably in our regular diet. The vegan protein powder has quite a bit. You know, we can't handle it.
Yeah, so... But truly a growing podcast that we really enjoy, really respect his vulnerability, and he has a really interesting life story, so check it out.
Yes. When we were thinking about life-changing podcasts, some other podcasts came to mind, which they're not podcasts I listen to as much now, but in the past they were majorly life-changing for me. One is Audio Dharma, which plays talks from the Inside Meditation Center in Redwood City, California, which, you know, when we were living in the Bay Area, I got to go there and it was like totally fangirling. But they have talks from there that they play. Gil Fronsdale is like one of the main teachers there. And when I was first getting into Buddhism and meditation and mindfulness, those talks were just so inspirational to me. And I think if you are like newer to the space of like Buddhism, mindfulness, meditation, and you really want to learn more about it, that's definitely a place to go. And another life-changing podcast, and it's funny because I'm like, I don't think this podcast's intent is to be life-changing, but for me, it just is. That is This American Life. I love This American Life. I love like pretty much all NPR podcasts, unlike some people on this call right now. But I do love This American Life. And I just think it's like such a well-produced podcast. And they go into these random topics and they bring on people. And for some reason, like these people's perspectives on like these obscure topics, like I saw this week's is about summer camp. But like these people's perspectives on these obscure topics can oftentimes be like so inspiring. Sometimes it's just like so funny or so comical or like brings like an interesting perspective to like something that's so mundane. But I find This American Life to be just so inspirational sometimes. And so I did add those two to my list of life-changing podcasts.
I love it, Sammie. I definitely know and seen how much they've influenced you, so I definitely support it. And if you have any podcasts that you listen to that you have found to be really influential, let us know.
Mm-hmm. We love listening to new podcasts or new podcast episodes, so if there's a podcast that you love or an episode that just like really resonated with you, send it to us because we want to know, like share the inspiration, share the growth.
Shoot it our way. We love listening to new podcasts. Send it via Apple Podcasts because then the link gets saved in my podcast folder and doesn't get lost. So that works, even though I listen to them all on Spotify. But you know, you get it. You know how to send it. You know how to reach us.
That's right, Michelle. You know how to reach us. And if you don't, it'll be in the show notes. So you can also check there. But most importantly, be sure to join us next time as we put down the rulebook and rethink the status quo.
Hey there! Welcome to Status Poster episode, our after show,
Yes.
our post-jingle chatter. Episode is done, but we do like to tag this on at the end because we just like to chat with each other, and we know that some people are interested in other stuff we have to say that maybe isn't life-changing.
And others are not. So we put it at the end now. So that way everybody can get the good stuff, and the people who want a little more can join us here.
Our true fans.
Our true fans.
Just kidding.
Our only fans.
Our only fans.
Our only true fans.
It's funny, Sammie, because we have all of these life-changing podcasts, but I don't want people to be mistaken. I have a lot of cotton candy, fluffy podcasts that I listen to as well. Sometimes I just want to listen to something, listen to two people chatter about something random while I'm like cleaning the kitchen or whatever.
And sometimes I want to listen to extremely obscure topics.
Like what?
Like, for example, my cults podcast.
Oh my gosh.
This podcast goes into, like, it deep dives into a different cult every episode, every few episodes. And it is so interesting. It's just really fascinating. I mean, first of all, a lot of these took place in California, which I was like, a little concerning.
Concerning, but we can see it.
But it's just like so juicy, and I do love it.
Sammie, I can't judge you because your love of cults is like my love of conspiracy theories. I was trying to listen to this podcast on the Kennedys, and it was deep with conspiracies. And after a certain point, I was like, you know what, I can't listen to this because I'm getting a little bit gray. What happens to me a lot is I start to end up in the gray zone with history, and sometimes I'm like, okay, I need to step away from this.
Yes. There was a podcast, Slow Burn, about the Monica Lewinsky, Bill Clinton scandal, and maybe just Bill Clinton in general. And that was also super juicy, and I really enjoyed listening to it. Like, I could listen to it for hours.
I know, you listened to it while my friend Alicia was sleeping on our couch. And she'll always send me exciting things about that scandal to forward your way. I think other shows that I love, I do listen to a lot of the Betches podcast. You Up, Oversharing. I went to the Girls Gotta Eat show with my friend Margaret, like live. Mm-hmm. So I love all the good stuff. Like I love hearing like women chatter. I love dating podcasts, all those kind of things.
Oh my gosh, yes. I haven't listened in a long time, but I used to love Dan Savage's podcast.
Oh.
That one is just so funny. And he has like the best advice. Like I was like, dang, I wish I could talk to my friends, you know? But he's hilarious.
I will say I went on a date after I went to the Girls Gotta Eat podcast show. And I was just talking about it. And I was like, yeah, I know it's a little basic, but I enjoy it. It was a really good time. And the guy was like, yeah. And I was like, it's sort of like dudes who listen to Joe Rogan. And he got so defensive after I said that.
He's like, Joe Rogan does all his research.
Joe Rogan is actually super intelligent and no hate to Joe Rogan. Side-eye. But I was like, I think that's the male equivalent to some of these podcasts that I'm listening to. I will stand by that.
So true. What do you think is like the trashiest podcast you ever listened to?
This is probably not the expected result, but the top podcast for me last year was The Bachelor, because I kept listening to the Bachelor recaps after watching The Bachelor.
Yes.
And I was embarrassed that I had dedicated so many of my podcasting hours to listening to The Bachelor recap. We really went down a Bachelor rabbit hole last year, living at home, and I'm not proud of it.
Not proud of it, and yet what are we watching this year?
The Bachelorette. Speaking of cults.
It's a cult. It's really a cult. It's like, and this time with the two females, being on the podcast.
Two women. You sound like an incel.
Okay, first of all, incels. Michelle told me about what they were, and I'm literally dead because it's so accurate. Like, there are these people out there, males, who like feel like they will never get any, and it's like, it's true. Like, you never will. But other people have no problem. But yes, The Bachelorette.
Yeah, we're watching it. We're behind actually right now, but
we're super behind. But you know what? It's a little curious. I thought it'd be super fun, two girls, but then I realized they're like sharing all the guys, and it seems like it's a little bit more chaotic than expected.
It's a hot mess, not like drama hot mess, like a mess.
Yeah, and you know how they like make out with people? It's like, how are they supposed to make out with everybody if like they're both going to be making out with the same people? I mean, I'm sure they don't care to some degree, but then they kind of do, and they definitely don't want that to be publicized on television
again. Again,
yes.
Anyway, that's our post show. Love you guys. Catch you next time.